There's a big difference between teaching the material to children and teaching children the material. It's a different focus. When you're teaching the material to children, the material is in your way between you and the children. And once you do master this material, then you teach the children the material.
Okay, welcome everyone to episode 10 of Digital Education Dialogues. I'm happy to be joined as usual by my co-host, Professor Chris Dede from Harvard Graduate School of Education. And also today we have two distinguished guests joining us for a very, very important topic of addressing teacher shortages. For those of you who follow our whole series, you might wonder why we are coming to a second episode around the important topic of educators and educator training. And it's very simple. The digital school, it's simple to talk about. It's not simple to solve. The digital school realized very early in its life that our mission to serve students required attention to serving the needs of educators, because without educators, we don't achieve the learning objectives we want for our students. As we've developed over the past 3 years, we've realized that it's not only about training the teachers who are already in the profession, because in many parts of the world, there simply are not enough teachers. So this episode specifically focuses on addressing teacher shortages, what is being done about it, what are some initiatives that are already underway, and our two guests will talk about initiatives that they lead, and also what can be done, what else can be done, what new initiatives can we put in place. The UN Sustainable Development Goal 4, which is around education, equity of education and access, is hindered hugely by teacher shortages. And those shortages are most acute in the areas of most need, the areas that digital schools serves, where we have marginalized communities, marginalized students, and exacerbated all the time by the lack of teachers. That lack of teachers is caused by many, many factors, but very simply categorized, there are not enough teachers coming into the profession for all sorts of reasons. Teachers start training and then leave. They never complete the training, so they never actually become qualified teachers and never get into the classroom. And then others, the third category, they do get into the classroom, but they don't stay. They leave for many reasons, more money elsewhere, family circumstances, etc. And I just want to share one small anecdote before I hand over to our guests. It's probably about 10, 15 years ago now. I was working with a group of teacher training institutes in Peru, rural Peru. And a story was told to us by the head of that institute of how the dropout rate for the teacher training institute in Huancayo, which is a mountainous rural region of Peru, the dropout rate was something like 70%. And the main reason was funding. Now, wait for this. The fees for the year for that teacher training institute were $50 US, 50, not 500, not 5,000. But the trainee teachers who joined could not sustain that level of fee. And so the dropout rate was 70%. Now, that is likely one of the key factors elsewhere. And we'll investigate some of those factors today. And as I said, focus on initiatives that can make a difference and create some improvement rather than this being the barrier that it currently is. So let's move on to introduce our two guests. We have Arushi Mittal, who is currently leading innovations in India in this area, and Fred Mednick, who is the founder of Teachers Without Borders.
So I'm Chris Dede with the Harvard Graduate School of Education. I co-host this series of episodes in the Digital School webinars, Digital Education Dialogues. And I'm very excited by this episode today. I've just met Fred, but Arushi is an alumnus of our master's program and someone who came to us with a lot of skills, and we hope we added some. And she really has been a force in improving education. So I'm happy that she's joining us today, along with the Teachers Without Borders group. I just want to reflect a little bit before we start on the multidimensional nature of being an effective teacher, because I think often too much focus is placed on content knowledge and too little emphasis is placed on many other dimensions of being an effective teacher, like being able to motivate the particular students that you're working with and being able to personalize to different kinds of children with different kinds of needs and strengths. So it's obviously great when a teacher has strong content knowledge, but attempts to say, well, someone's retiring, let's say as an engineer, so now they can teach science education in the school without much preparation, because they've got the content knowledge, and after all, it's just pouring knowledge into kids' brains. Well, not really. So one of the tricks, I think, and I'm looking forward to our guests responding to this and telling me if I'm off target, but one of the levers that we can use is to say to people, okay, your content knowledge isn't so great, but you bring other strengths that are terrific. And so whatever you come in with, if you've got some of these strengths, we'll help you gain the ones you don't have so that you can be a strong teacher. So to provide some context for our listeners about our guests and about the digital school, I'd like each of you to talk about the initiatives that you lead right now to help with the challenges of teacher shortages that we've been discussing. And Arushi, I'll ask you to start and then we'll jump to Fred.
Thank you, Chris. Very glad to meet you here, Fred. I currently lead Ashvattha Learning Communities. We are based in northwestern part of India in a state called Rajasthan, and we work here with the public school system in creating effective teacher development programs for early professionals, like early teaching professionals. So as soon as they've entered the school system after getting the teacher training diplomas or degrees. I won't go into the effectiveness or the efficacy of those programs right now in the context where I am, but we work with the public education system to figure out what are the innovative ways to support teachers early in their journeys. And of course, very similar to what is being discussed here, that our efforts are geared towards reinforcing the content knowledge that the teachers have, because in India, the teachers who are coming into the public school system actually have much better content knowledge than other teachers in private schools. However, the skills to actually transfer that knowledge and the application of that knowledge is something which is completely missing at the moment. And also, one of the other focus areas that we have is that what is the purpose of education? And if the purpose is to actually ensure a child's learning and well-being, then what are the teachers doing, and are they skilled enough to be able to ensure the child's well-being, especially in a context where their well-being has not been ensured in their own communities, in definitely not in the educational institutes that where they've been, and also in the socio-political climate where we are living in. So in that context, how can a teacher still continue to let alone actually act towards a child's well-being, but care about a child's well-being. So that's something that we are trying to do through a couple of programs where we run intensive 2-year-long fellowship programs. And that's a combination of online workshops, in-person workshops, and most importantly, one-on-one instructional coaching where we observe the teacher's classroom and give them individualized feedback. Because of course, as we all know, that that's one of the main things that supports an early professional's journey in any profession, and teaching being one of them. And another problem that we're trying to solve, and still I would say trying to solve, is how to bring teachers together and build communities in our context so that they can continue supporting each other, and again do that in their early years so that they don't get jaded by the system and by the harsh realities of our context. I will not take too much time, but one of the things, because it's really, really on my mind right now, we work in rural schools in Rajasthan, and we had known that children get pulled into agricultural work at this time of the year, and so there is the attendance goes down, and everything is sort of like nothing is going as per the system. So we knew about it, and we were trying to figure out, okay, what is the support that teachers need to be able to deal with that, and can this even be dealt with? And as we're working more with the teachers who also are from rural areas and live there, we're realizing that they also have the same responsibilities. And now, as an organization that's not based in rural area but is operating in rural areas, like what is it that is our responsibility? So when we say a teacher, like, and because we're talking about teacher shortage, and I was really wondering about that, who is a teacher? What does a teacher mean? Like, and in different contexts, what is the definition of that profession? What is the number of hours that is expected from that professional? And I'm sure like that would vary across all of our contexts. Yes.
So Fred,
Right. Yeah,
tell us about Teachers Without Borders.
sure. There was so much, Rushi, that I resonated with. Um, and just a very quick story. Well, I am Fred Mednick. I'm the head. I founded Teachers Without Borders in 2000. I'm professor emeritus at Vrije Université Bruxelles in the University of Brussels, and work with the international education program. So teachers or educators would come to Brussels for their master's degrees and PhDs and go back to serve their ministries of education or, NATO, the European Union. And what I resonated with was realizing in many ways that the teachers that we work with, and I'm thinking of really three areas, Nigeria, Afghanistan, and India, all lived the lives of the students they were teaching, so that they had these experiences. The teacher shortages in a lot of these areas came in large part because of institutional instabilities, and that we realized that we had to figure out ways of surviving institutions rather than thriving because of them. And and so you do a dance with institutions. You have to live with them, and you don't want to live with them, but you can't live without them, right? And there is this way in which you have to find strength from, you work horizontally, but you have this vertical world, and that could pound you. The top can pound you, or you can, embed yourself completely within the formal institutional structure, or you play the stance. So to be more specific, in Nigeria, we worked not necessarily within the context of the formal or the non-formal, but in the National Year of Service, which you have to do in Nigeria. And often, students would be assigned to do their national year of service. They'd be sent to a school to do sort of odd jobs and things. But because of attrition, as you say, and absenteeism, all of a sudden these kids are in front of students. They just teach them. This happened a lot. So we worked with, thousands and thousands of these kids to survive their year of internship, sort of speak. And instead of doing something, like Teach for America, where there's an active solicitation of students or students want to do this, we had students who didn't necessarily know what they wanted. So, we worked on identifying local talent and realized that the identification of local talent came in all forms. It came through the business sector. So I remember first day of Teachers Without Borders, I asked the UN staffer, who is, what's your definition of a teacher? And the guy said, anybody with valuable information to share. In this world of kind of fake news and lies, the word valuable is important and sharing it is important. But, just as Chris said, it's not that anybody can become a teacher. We tend to demean the teaching profession by doing that. There's a certain professional expertise. Yet at the same time, there's valuable information to share. And sometimes it's the who, sometimes it's the what, and sometimes it's the when. So in Nigeria, it was these kids. But the kids had an effect. And, in India, it was more mentors, that were keeping people in the profession. The situation, in Afghanistan was you absolutely could not trust any institution to do anything for you. And that institutions don't even make promises. They just close down schools. So keeping people learning in this environment meant finding ways in which, through, let's say, WhatsApp secret schools, you found ways of accessing people, which in some cases has taken off and done quite well. And I take very little, we're only a part of this program. It's not a program we run. But, you have to be a boxer, a dancer with the institutions that exist and the institutions that will fail you if you put all your, eggs in one basket. So I guess the contribution to this is absolutely multidimensional, but to do this where it counts the most, dealing with attrition or burnout or just, I think it's in many cases a country by country issue, and it sure would be nice for us to pool, the programs, together. One really quick thing. I'm sorry, I'm going on too much. You'd think I wouldn't at 6:30 in the morning. Is well, I'll save it for later because I think there's something to be said for working outside of education to do the talent search, and to not put all your eggs in the basket of teacher education schools as well.
So, Dr. Lesley, we had an earlier episode on the teacher capacity building and that the digital school does, but you could talk about that for this group of listeners and also where you resonate with some of the things that Arushi and Fred have said.
Yeah, absolutely. There are so many areas of resonation and alignment, I think. So to go back to our earlier episode, the digital school started with a vision and a mission to serve marginalized students and to reach 1 million learners. But as as I mentioned in the introduction, we very quickly realized that in order to do that, we absolutely had to address the needs of teachers, particularly when we're looking at digitalizing curriculum and content. The educators weren't necessarily familiar with that. And so upskilling and supporting and developing teachers became almost our main mission in order to achieve the student numbers that we wanted to reach. We first established a series of professional development courses with Arizona State University as our partner. So we designed the courses that we want to enable teachers to qualify as digital educators. These courses were very basic. We were realistic. We knew that teachers couldn't commit years and years. So they were, weeks, months in the series of courses. We very quickly had to adjust our level 1 course. We had level 1, level 2, level 3. Level 3 went into a lot more depth. Level 1 was a very basic orientation to teaching online in digital environments of different types, using devices of different types. But we quickly realized that even that was a challenge for many of these educators who had never even switched on a laptop or had never really known. This is a quote from one teacher: "I never knew what smart meant in terms of smartphone. I only ever used it to ring my mum. I didn't realize it, gave me a window on the world." So we introduced level 0, which was really, lift up the lid, press the button. And so that started our sequence of training. I was really fascinated by, both Arushi and Fred. You mentioned the role and the definition of a teacher and how multifaceted it is. And we found that we work across 14 countries right now. And we have found that in every single country, the teacher needs and the teacher's strengths or training is different. And a particular example in Egypt were our community teachers who were teaching in remote desert rural schools they are government schools, but they're off the grid. They're not the normal education system. And they were put in place to give some basic education to students up to grade 6 in their own community, where it was not feasible for them to travel the distances needed to get to the closest city to attend a regular school. These were put in place, I believe, 10, 15 years ago, and they are staffed not by qualified teachers, but by committed community members who are called facilitators. But they have the same role. They lead the learning of those students. They have multiple grades. So they have grades 1 to 6 in one school. There's only one room. It's a one-room school building. And they work in 2 separate groups, 2 teachers, or 1 teacher and 1 assistant, 1 aide. One adult working with grades 1 to 3, 1 adult working with grades 4 to 5. So not only multiple grades in the same classroom, but 2 distinct groups. And then within those groups, those people are interpreting the curriculum for grade 4, for grade 5, and for grade 6, and facilitating all 3 simultaneously, while at the other end of the room, their colleague is doing the same for grades 1, 2, 3. That, to me, is skilled teaching. Even if the outcomes for the students might be limited, it still takes skill to do that, to develop lesson plans, to manage those students in a way that some regular teachers who are trained, highly qualified, just couldn't even think of doing. They need 1 grade level, and then they need the ability grouping, and even then they find that challenging. Differentiation is challenging. So that brings us then to thinking about what next. How can we make this better from a digital school point of view? And the model of the community facilitators is something that we will take forward with other countries. We value our trained teachers, and in many of our locations, they are highly qualified, they are well trained, they're already digitally confident and digitally literate. But in other places where we find this teacher shortage, and particularly shortages of teachers who have any digital capacity, we are introducing a scheme that, as a working title, we're calling BEST, B-E-S-T, Basic Educator Skills Training. And some of the things that have come up already in this episode are really key to what we want to do, because we need to agree, what are the basic educator skills? Do they need 3 years to learn the curriculum, which is what happens in some countries' teacher training programs? Because as Chris said, are they just knowledge regurgitators? They learn the curriculum, they regurgitate it to the students, almost in real time. Or is there more to being a teacher? And if so, what is there to being a teacher? Is it about skills? Is it technical skills? Of course, there are some. How do you manage students? The bigger the group, the harder it is to manage. You need to be able to group students. You need to be able to address individual learning needs, or at least small group learning needs. But I think my starting point will be what both Arushi and Fred alluded to, which is, or mentioned, which is the caring for the students holistically. If you are a person who cares about a child's learning or a young person's learning, you have the basic requirement to start learning technical skills that will let you teach. I don't say that's the only thing, of course not. There are skills in terms of digital literacy, grouping, curriculum, structuring a lesson, all those things that make up motivation for students. But some of the best models historically, I think, have been apprenticeship models, for example, where the people teaching are not trained as teachers, but they demonstrate to students, they mentor, they act as a coach. They're not just a font of knowledge that has to be passed on. They care about the development of that student, that child, that young person. And I think one of the questions, just to close this, one of the questions I used to ask when I was professor of education with George Mason University for some years, an adjunct professor, and I used to ask my trainee teacher students then, ask yourself this question when you are trying to self-reflect. When I teach, do students learn? And I think if you can answer in the affirmative, it doesn't matter whether you've got the qualification ticked. It shows that you have the caring for the students, and you also have the basic skills that are going to help those students learn.
So Arushi and Fred, as you listen to this articulation of the digital school model, do you have feedback that you want to provide about it?
I absolutely agree. There was, when I was hired as a teacher, the principal of the school, my first teaching job, called me into her office and said, I don't really get you. You you don't really know how to teach. And I thought, oh, you don't know how to do lesson plans. You don't really even know how to write on the chalkboard. You don't really know much about this whole teaching things, but your kids are thriving and they're doing really well. I can't figure you out. So you have to come to my house every Thursday night, where there was a blackboard in her living room. And I had to do all my lessons all over again in front of her. Now, this sounds pretty harsh, but she said, look, you have talent and no skills. I'm going to give you skills. And I'd rather have somebody who has talent and no skills than a lot of skills, so to speak, and no talent. Now, it's an interesting way to start one's career. And I, to this day, don't particularly buy it all the time, that notion of talent and skills, because I think it descends into this discussion about whether teachers are born or made. And I actually think teachers aren't born or made. I think they just show up, at least in the field of international development. Um, but I think that, um, there is love, but there can be at times not much learning, and there can be a lot of learning, so to speak, and not much love. And I think what our balancing act was perfectly phrased to me by my same mentor, principal, tough mentor. She said there's a big difference between teaching the material to children and teaching children the material. It's a different focus. When you're teaching the material to children, the material is in your way between you and the children. And once you do master this material, then you teach the children the material. And when I put this into frameworks for teachers, I say, you got to know your stuff, and we got to keep the standard high. But let me get rid of all this godforsaken big forms and things teachers have to do with, filling out all this stuff, for their professors. All I want is for you to see how you can teach them, the children the material. And your lesson plan will be, instead of all this stuff, educationally, a way in, a way through, and a way forward. And you go figure it out. The talented ones figure it out. Now, I'm not also saying that the subject matter, is the most important thing. But, you live in this world. And if you really love the children, you're going to want them to learn. And so, in many ways, we say the same things. I just have to emphasize certain things for particular, young teachers or, to get it in their head that the kids are the most important. So I have to master this material and to bridge that gap. And it's a very delicate thing. Whether you're hard on them, whether you're soft on them, you gotta be there. And so for me, I'm really interested in the mentorship component, who a mentor is, and when and where they show up.
Arushi, thoughts about this?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of threads almost entangled in my head, and I'm going to try and pick them apart. One is that because of the times we are living in, it's become even more important that the teacher is not just passing on the knowledge and just really making sure that the children learn skills and they know how to do that. And there, I think the informal teacher training institutions, as Lesley you were pointing out, might be actually being an impediment at the moment by giving them structures, and similar to how schools sort of suck out the love for learning in most situations from all human beings. Maybe the teacher training institutions are just sucking out the love for children and love for teaching in some way by just making it too rigorous and too bureaucratic, much more than actually is needed for the purpose, as Fred just explained very beautifully in that example. The other thing, like I agree with you, Lesley, in terms of the examples that you shared about teachers from the community, because and teachers who are from the community but not formally trained, because we at Ashvath, we work with both kind of teachers who are from the community, but we are working with them directly and they've not been trained by a formal institution, and those who've come through formal institutions. And one big difference that I can see is this sort of like that, because the teachers who've been in formal institutions have been pulled out of their own realities and their own cultures and have been made to believe that something else is more important than your own people, and that everything is external. You don't know anything. This book knows something. This degree knows something. This professor knows something. So even when they go back and they've lived similar lives, I think they are failing to see the beauty from, like, in their own people, in the children, and in what they already know. And again, that brings us back to the children and material thing, that they're becoming more obsessed about the material. And of course, it doesn't help that, especially in public schools, all the systems and all the forces are constantly evaluating teachers on the material and asking them on how you're doing this, and which now, like in our experience, has led to a situation when we are pushing the teachers in public education system to not think so much about material and think about children. They are pushing back. They sort of like keep complaining that you don't talk about material enough. Why are you not just telling us how to do this? Why are you not just giving us a lesson plan? Why are you not giving us demo videos? And we're like, because you need to learn how to think about children first, before you like think about the materials. Like, so I think the models that we think of, like, how can I, and I wonder, like in the example that you gave, Lesley, from Egypt, like I was really wondering that how did that organization work? What is the kind of agency that the organization created, or the government created for those facilitators? How much of it was top down? How much of it, how much of the content that they were um, taking to those students related to the context? Again, going back to the example of agricultural communities that I shared at the beginning, like I've been wondering that what if like our public school teachers didn't always have to finish these textbooks, science, math, literature, whatever, and had the freedom to just what one of you said, I wrote it down, keep people learning. Like if they just had that one focus, that keep the students learning, it doesn't matter if a child is going for harvesting, what is the science and math and language that you can teach there? Because what is important is that they keep learning. What is not important is this material. So in terms of the comment on what the digital school is thinking in terms of models, I think there's a lot of potential, and I would love to definitely know more and see how we can work together.
And Lesley, I think it would be great to go deeper into Egypt, but I'm watching the time, and I want to make sure that we also get to digital technologies and how digital technologies are changing the opportunities and increasing the opportunities. So I do co-host another podcast series called Silver Lining for Learning. And the title comes from the fact that the pandemic was a terrible tragedy, but it also was an opportunity to put in place both a technical and a human infrastructure for doing online learning everywhere. And I know the digital school has taken advantage of that in a couple of ways. One of them is to do some of the education online, and that has advantages, especially in places like refugee camps, where there is no infrastructure at all in terms of brick and mortar for classrooms. But the other is, and Leslie, maybe this would apply to some of what you're going to say about Egypt, the digitalization of the curriculum, where even if students are meeting face to face, not online, having the curriculum in digital form opens up some opportunities for the exciting kinds of teaching that Fred and Arushi are talking about. So just prompting you to bring digital into it.
Yes, thanks, Chris. And I will absolutely focus on digital, but I just want to comment on a couple of things that Fred and Arushi said there. It highlights how interconnected all the aspects of education are, because things resonate today from previous episodes. For example, just to bring the focus back onto marginalized in the digital school context, there was a comment, are teachers harsher or are they softer on children? Are we putting love before learning, or learning before love, or love before material and material before love of the children? And I think it's really important for a good teacher, whether qualified or not, to be able to adjust the teaching style depending on what the students need. So that's an important point, because sometimes you might need to be a very strict teacher with some students or groups or in some circumstances. And at other times with other students, you might need to be very gentle and soft. And so you need to have those, many different tools in your teacher toolkit and many different affects in your teacher toolkit. The other thing that had occurred to me is, many of our students are in refugee camps and they are traumatized. They've had horrendous lives. They might have been very, very strong students, and suddenly, with a day's notice or less, they're not only out of their home and their school, but they're out of their country and they're in an alien environment totally. And I think one of the things, it's automatic to think that for those students, the love has to come first. And of course it has. That has to underpin everything. You've got to care for them. But the actual learning and the structure of learning, and sometimes the focus on material, gives that structure, and it gives those students a sense of purpose and stability that they've lost. And that all the sort of hugs and caring in the world, however important as a ground base, are not enough. And I think what education does, when you give them the structures and the predictability of a structured lesson plan, that they know it's going to be the same structure the next time and it's going to follow on from the previous week, that stability can rebuild their sense of purpose and hope, and can give them back aspirations that might have been shattered. So I wanted to make that point. The second point that links to a previous episode we did is around assessment. And so I don't think we can address that again today, but I would raise the question again of, what are the outcomes of education intended to be? If we just say it's enough to keep the students learning, and I feel a real affinity with that statement. My own background was with special needs students for years and years and years, and you can't tie them to regular defined outcomes. But who's accountable? What's the time in school being spent on? What's the money put into education being used for? And so there has to be accountability. And if we had time for another episode with Fred and Arushi, that would be really interesting to address that question of, where's the accountability if you spend 6 weeks with students just helping them learn and you have no evidence to show for it, or what evidence should there be? Without becoming bureaucratic, which I think we all agree is one of the things driving teachers or keeping teachers out of the profession. So to come, Chris, to your question of digital, I mean, digital has been a challenge for us, as I pointed out, with those educators, particularly our community educators in Egypt, where they really struggled with the devices. But it's been such a huge opportunity. They do say themselves, it's transformed their lives. It's put them on the educational map. It's given them kudos in the community because they are digital educators. They have a smart board, they have a smartphone, and they're using those two things. It's not necessarily one-to-one laptops in digital school. We have the whole range where sometimes there is literally one teacher, one smart board, and one device, and the teacher is facilitating student learning through them as a group. On the other hand, we've had situations where we've done totally 100% remote teaching. The teachers have been remote, the students have been in their own homes, and so everybody has had a device, and that has worked well also. So I think digital raises challenges. We don't have enough devices to go around. We are not an organization. We've never set out to provide devices to everyone. We facilitate partnerships to get devices into students' hands, into teachers' hands, but we don't directly provide those. But what we've done with digital is, and will continue to do, and there's much scope to broaden that, is we open up different learning environments. We want our students to be able to learn effectively face-to-face through a whole range of blended models and fully online. So fully online, face-to-face, and everything in between. And one of the central pillars for the digital school is to help the students develop self-directed learning skills. And again, coming back to the educators, which are the real topic for today, to be able to facilitate self-directed learning in students is, again, a real skill and a particular mindset for teachers. Because teachers typically, traditionally, are center stage. I'm a teacher, so I can say this: we like to talk. we enjoy that. We enjoy sharing information. And often, if you observe a classroom or a lesson, either face-to-face or online, 90% of the spotlight is on the teacher. The teacher talks, the students listen. The students are often passive. A big change we need to make when we train teachers going forward is that their role is to teach students how to learn, how to be effective learners, how to learn when there's no teacher around, how to learn when there's no school, how to learn after you've had to do farming in the field in the morning, if that's your real circumstance. And I'm not advocating that that is acceptable, children in the fields instead of in school. But if that's the reality, if we give students the skills of being self-directed learners, they can still continue their education despite their circumstances. And so I think digital gives us those opportunities with students, that they can learn anywhere, anytime. It gives us those opportunities with teachers. We established the Digital Educator Global Academy, DEGA, as I mentioned earlier, with Arizona State University. And the idea there is to give anyone access to develop their skills, whether they're already qualified teachers or whether they're community members wanting to take some courses in online teaching or differentiation or how to identify learning outcomes. And I think my last comment on digital is, when we've been talking to governments, because we engage with governments at the highest level when we start a new relationship with a country. And the education authorities in those countries will often say to us, digitalizing the curriculum, and that means the materials that we were talking about, the content, the textbooks, is in itself a huge benefit to a country. And it's empowering, and it gives the possibility of extending education way beyond just physical schools. The cost that countries go into to review and revise, for example, a math textbook series or the science curriculum for the whole country, the costs are huge. Then if you're still based in paper textbooks or physical textbooks, you need to print them. You need to distribute them across the country into your rural schools. Going digital with your curriculum and content materials is in itself a huge benefit. Going digital with teachers means you make it accessible to a much broader range. You could even feasibly have teachers teaching in your country who are not physically in your country, if you were aligned with a trusted organization outside the country. That could be one way of solving your teacher shortages. And then finally, digital absolutely bestows benefits on the students because it gives them, it opens school with a small s and inverted commas to such a broad definition of anytime, anywhere.
So I'm watching the time, and as usual, the hour is racing by. So one question that we always ask our guests is, within the next 5 years, what would you like to have happen within your model? What if you were optimistic about the next 5 years, where would you like to be at the end of that time? And I'll combine that with where you see digital going within your model, if anywhere, and how digital might empower some of that 5-year vision. So Fred or Arushi.
I want to get into that. Can I take 30 seconds to respond to something Lesley just said? So I think while I am a big believer of technology and we include technology in everything that we do, but while I was listening to you, like I was really also wondering about the digitalization of curricular material and what is the usability of it eventually, because again, I'm only talking about the Indian context, and I've seen the digital material and largely like it's not very usable, and then if it's supposed to go out of the school, then like are the teachers or the community members trained to actually take it out of the school, or is it just like one digitization is just the first step and in no way a sufficient condition? And the other thing, because we talked about the refugee situation, which actually made me also realize in this moment that one of the reasons why we also sometimes struggle with digital adoption in our programs is because there isn't enough motivation. In a refugee situation, there is enough motivation because that is the only way. We, at least like again, in our context, we exist in a situation where there isn't vacuum. There is something, it's just so bad and people have no benchmark. So we think it's good. It's like McDonald's food for the Americans in some way. So everyone thinks they're eating, but they're not really eating. And yeah, so I think like that's something to like just wanted to say that. I hope that in 5 years, we would have figured out how to take technology integrated classrooms to rural schools, where teachers will play a role, but children will become self-directed learners, as Lesley has pointed out, is very, very important. And that teachers themselves will build a growth mindset and will learn to use technology to enhance their own skills. And we also hope that in 5 years, we'll be able to build an AI-enabled classroom coach, a tool that can give real-time feedback to teachers on their classroom practice based on actual audio-video data, and support the teaching practice as well as students' learning outcomes and not related only to subject learning. And hopefully from there, we can move the teacher spotlight and like not have teachers take up 90% of the talk time and give it more to students. Over to you, Fred.
Well, I couldn't agree more, especially with the challenges in the field of the real-time experience of teachers having to deal with also the flood of magic bullets and killer apps being thrown at them, because they see a difference between where they are. In some cases, with some teachers think, well, I'm just not competent teaching and I don't know how to use this device. it could be quite intimidating, especially in the shift that we've had to make. I think a couple things really quickly. The 5 years, I absolutely agree with Arushi about this notion of AI mentorship. Um, that there can be this combination between peer-to-peer communities of practice, and a kind of objective feedback, especially a non-judgmental one, having to do with your actual practice and the personalization of it. I'm all for that stuff, and I've jumped either to the dark side or what. I mean, in terms of AI as opportunity, rather than as threat. So I'm there. I just have to deal with the realities of the issues that came up earlier about dignity, um, and about this continuum of efficiency and effectiveness. A lot of this stuff says it will be more effective when in fact it assumes that if you're more efficient, you will naturally be more effective. And I don't believe that that argument is a done deal. Sure, if you give some efficiencies and it can do this and that, you have more time to work with students or whatever it is, to give the teacher more human opportunities with kids, that's a kind of a logical leap. It could be, in fact, that the AI facilitates a lot of these human connections because the dignity of a kid climbing the stairs of her accomplishments, by mastering subject matter, especially in areas of literacy, could go a long way into humanizing, instruction because the kids feel like they can read the newspaper. So, it's still this debate. I'm not a fan of flooding the place full of this because that just is a disaster. And we've used, radio, low tech as well as high tech. It's again that dance, and it's quite contextual.
As someone who is an expert in AI, I agree completely with what all three of you have said about the appropriate role of AI. We have prior episodes in this webinar series, Digital Education Dialogues, that are about AI. And if this is of interest to you as viewers, I hope that you'll take a look at them. But it's AI in the service of teachers and students, not AI as a replacement. So, Lesley, you have the final word in terms of whatever you want to say about our latest discussion, as well as wrapping up this webinar.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I'd like to say huge thank you to Fred and Arushi for joining us and adding insight and very interesting perspectives and field experiences. I think this is very important. It's important to hear from theorists, from researchers, and it's very important to hear what's actually happening in the field. And those experiences can be very inspiring. We can do more, we can make it work, even if it's in a small way. I think it's been a very rich discussion today. We've looked at, some of the basic skills that we think an effective educator needs. And we've looked at caring for students, caring about students, and we've looked at ensuring that students learn continuously. And those two things, I think, form the basis of a good teacher. We didn't talk about the essential nature of, a qualification. And I think that's really important in the context that we're talking about, that we identify basic skills beyond what you can gain through book learning in a university or a college. And it's not to dismiss those by any means, but to be realistic about what alternatives can be put in place in parallel as a supplement to address the teacher shortages. We've looked at marginalized contexts, very important. The dignity of students was mentioned several times, the need for them to feel cared for and cared about, but also the need for some structure. And we know that from family life, kids need structure. they need to know their boundaries. They need to know their next steps. And I think a good teacher is going to give that to students, and in a marginalized context that allows the students to have that sense of purpose and moving forward and re-establishing to some extent the stability that they might have lost through adverse circumstances. We also raised a very important question, which we didn't attempt to really look at today, but relates to a previous episode, and that's the question of accountability. Accountability from the school, from the national education authorities, and from the teachers themselves to what are the outcomes of students that we should expect. And I think when we look at digital, the outcomes change somewhat. And I don't think that's been clearly defined yet. It's something I know UNESCO is looking at. How will digital learning change student outcomes and the way we think about the expectations, the benchmarks, and the assessment methods that we apply? So thank you again to the two guests. Thank you, Chris, as our co-host. We encourage you to seek out our other episodes. They're all interrelated. Education is multifaceted. And as an educator or an AI specialist, or someone who's interested in development education, marginalized education, you will find something in those episodes to resonate. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you.